Let's get started. So again, welcome everyone to the session looking to the future impact of the Innovative Medicines Initiative from the neurodegeneration portfolio. My name is Lennert Steukers. I actually work as a clinical scientist in, well, obviously clinical development, early development actually, of promising interventions in neurodegeneration, and this at the Janssen pharmaceutical companies. But I'm also the industry lead on IMI Neuronet. And so actually this session today is hosted by IMI Neuronet. Maybe just a little bit of background about Neuronet and why we organized this this workshop. So Neuronet is also an IMI project, but specifically devised in support of the individual IMI projects in the neurodegeneration portfolio. In essence, it is a platform across the portfolio that is really trying to drive efficiencies across. And this goes from facilitating collaborations in between projects and research teams, multiplying impact of the research finding in this very rich portfolio, increasing visibility and what have you. We did work the past couple of years and are still ongoing, trying to achieve this this ambitious objective. And we have conducted a couple of activities, for example, mapping the landscape of neurodegeneration research, understanding where there are gaps in the current research and opportunities for future research as well. But also, for example, really establishing a framework around impact to assess impact also on the research findings from the portfolio, and create also a couple of supporting tools for the portfolio. For example, a knowledge base that is capturing all the information on these individual IMI projects. What will we do today? So it will be a panel discussion, and I brought with me a couple of eloquent panelists, absolutely, which I will introduce as we go. But before we move into that panel discussion, we do have two brief presentations, actually, to share a little bit more on, well, the high-level intro I just gave. So what we did with Neuronet over the past couple of years. So the first presentation done by Fatima Salih, she will provide an overview of teams identified across the mapping and priority settings workshop. And then the second presentation will be done by Carlos Diaz, who will provide an overview of the Neuronet knowledge base, the asset map, and then the NEURO cohort as well. So first up, Fatima Salih. Fatima is actually a scientific advisor at the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence at NIH. She has extensive experience of leading health economics and outcomes research projects within health technology assessment. Fatima has also held various research roles actually in global and public health in the past, both in the UK and in Sudan. She has a master's in public health economics from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and is actually trained as a dentist. So she's in the operations lead of Work Package 1 for Neuronet. And Fatima, the floor is yours. Maybe just a brief reminder again to the audience. Please ask questions. After the two presentations, we will already look at some of the questions posed, and that can serve as some kind of a segue into the panel discussion. So Fatima, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll just give a bit of background to the activity, and then go into the overlapping themes across the workshops, and then our consultation activities, and then I'll just speak more about specific feedback that we received in each consultation. Next, please. So there was initial mapping carried out for Neuronet to understand just the research activity, the global research activity in neurodegenerative research. And then it compared the IMI portfolio to the global research portfolio. Then for this second stage, we carried out consultation with people with dementia and their supporters. And then following that, we carried out in parallel 2 workshops. The first with researchers in neurodegenerative disease and within IMI, and the other was a workshop for HTA and regulatory experts. For the researcher workshop, the plan was to understand what they thought were strategic initiatives in IMI, in neurodegenerative research. And for the HTA and regulatory workshop, it was more to understand the gaps, challenges and priorities from their perspective when drugs for neurodegenerative disease come into assessments. Next, please. So the first overlapping theme that came across all 3 workshops was the importance of public involvement. So firstly, at the earlier stages in being involved in priority setting for research and informing the design of studies. And one example that was provided in the research workshop of a successful model of this collaboration was the James Lind Alliance in the UK, which is a priority setting partnership model. A second theme that came up was the importance of involvement of patients and patient organizations in accurately communicating research findings to the wider community and feeding back to participants when they do take part in research in accessible language so that they can take it forward. However, we all understand that there are factors that organizations need to be taken into account to achieve effective involvement. And these are things like using accessible language, sharing pre-reading materials in advance to provide sufficient time to review documents, ensuring that people have the necessary support to take part, and other general items that were mentioned in terms of accessibility of research was that data to be publicly available in reports without redactions, which is an issue sometimes that is encountered in HTA documents, and also that for research to be more accessible, research articles should not be put behind a paywall. Next, please. So in terms of, there was a lot of overlap across the HTA and regulatory and workshop and the consultation with the European Working Group of People with Dementia and their supporters. And the main themes that came up were you need to be inclusive in order to capture the ranges of dementia there are, which is something that came up at the consultation for people with dementia and their supporters. And then in the HTA workshop, it was mentioned that the IMI neurodegenerative research portfolio is not reflective of the range of neurodegenerative conditions that are encountered in clinical practice. Another item that came up that was really important is that there's a need for accurate diagnosis and not assuming that all cognitive impairment is Alzheimer's disease. And this was something that came across both workshops also. Furthermore, it was mentioned that we need a better understanding of the disease to inform how it can be managed and how it could be treated. And it was discussed also in the European Working Group of People with Dementia consultation that broader research is needed to understand how we can address psychosocial aspects associated with conditions, while from an HTA perspective, stigma was highlighted as a hurdle to enrolling people to screening programs. Finally, it was also mentioned across both workshops that there was a need to learn more about how to modify disease and slow down the progression. Now that we've finished with the overlap across the workshops, I'm just going to move on to the next, to the specific research specific research needs that came up in consultation of people with dementia. So Brenda, next slide, please. First of all, they did agree with the priorities outlined in the IMI strategic research agenda for neurodegenerative disease. And then they also mentioned other areas where there is a need or gap. So next. The first thing was research into later stages and different types of disease. Next, please. They mentioned that there is not enough diversity in the IMI neurodegenerative disease portfolio, which has a strong focus on Alzheimer's and earlier stages disease. Next, and then just next also. And there was also a need for interdisciplinary research. So there were questions asked about why is there not more research into different conditions that people with dementia also have. And also having a broader scope of research beyond biomedical research to bring together both biomedical research and social aspects. Next. It was also discussed that it's important that there be transparency. So there should be clear and transparent information about research funding and how it's distributed across priority areas. And then finally, I know this was discussed earlier, but it was very strong. It came across really strongly in the workshop that there is a need to involve people with dementia in research in the context of public involvement. Then moving on now to the researcher workshop. So for the researcher workshop, it was run in a different way. So a list of initiatives was shared with researchers ahead of the workshop, and they were asked to rate them according to different variables. And these were innovation, openness, funding, and long-term impact. This list of neurodegenerative research initiatives is a subset of a more extensive list, but it was shortened down to keep it more manageable. And they were also asked to provide any additional initiatives that they thought should be on the list. Next, please. This is just an illustration of an initial map that was carried out based on the feedback that was received ahead of the workshop in a spreadsheet on the initiatives that were shared. And this just shows that according to how they rated them based on influence and innovation, they were put at different points in the map. And this was used to inform the discussion within the actual workshop. Next, please. So moving on to just the themes that came across in the researcher workshop. They mentioned, next please, that there are many initiatives and then that there is a redundancy in research efforts. So it's not clear what the impact is. And it seems like there were lots of initiatives happening in parallel. Next, please. So they came up with a potential alternative approach. Next, and that was to break down the larger problems in disease areas into very targeted and short-term projects. So take that jigsaw piece and get it out of the more complex problem. For example, having a project that is 6 to 12 months long, rather than repeating wide-ranging, overly ambitious projects, which could often be unsustainable. However, one downside to short-term projects might be that just getting the admin and getting it off, kicking it off might take time, so it might not be achievable in that sense. And then moving on now to the feedback from the HTA and regulatory workshop. So the first issue that was highlighted as in the regulatory workshop and HTA workshop was that data. Next, please. There's a need for longitudinal data on the natural progression of disease. It felt that there was quite a gap there. And there's a need for understanding the long-term outcomes data in the population. And also, when it comes to diagnosis, they felt that there's a need for predictive prognostic tests that are less invasive. There was mention of, there's blood tests have been mentioned a lot, but it's not something that is being used routinely. And then there's a need to understand the population that we need to target for early screening and diagnosis. Next, please. And then when it comes to trial designs, there's a need for better trial endpoints that translate into clinical outcomes and an understanding of how they are related to long-term outcomes. And again, there's a need for disease-modifying treatments because while there's a focus on diagnosis in the IMI strategic research agenda, they felt that if we focus on diagnosis without having disease-modifying treatments, that is very challenging. So we need to balance that out and look into more treatments. Another theme that came up in the HDN regulatory workshop was that there needs to be more alignment across HDN regulatory bodies, whether that was just more interaction at earlier stages, and then also alignment on evidence standards, because there could be an issue where from a regulatory perspective, a treatment can be approved, but when it comes to an HTA body, they will not approve it because of disagreement whether the evidence is sufficient or not. So earlier engagement would be quite helpful. And then another area where they felt that there should be more alignment was between HTA bodies, regulatory bodies, and industry, and whether that was on advising on appropriate study designs to industry before trials start, so that earlier engagement is quite helpful, so to make sure that the outcomes that come produce quite high quality evidence, and then also discussions about value of new products earlier on rather than at the end of the process to allow timely access of products to the market. And then in terms of the next steps, all of this feedback will be outlined in detail in a report to the IMI, which would include a landscape of the initiatives from the perspectives of researchers, and then gaps or priorities from the perspective of different stakeholders. Thank you, that's all for me.
Thanks a lot, Fatima. This was actually really useful. I think the insights from these different stakeholders are really valuable, and you can see that there is actually also a bit of an overlap, right? Which gives a clear signal, I would say. Let's move on to the second presentation before we see if there are any Q&A, and then for the panel discussion as well. The second speaker of today from Neuronet will be Carlos Diaz. So Carlos is the CEO of Synapse Research Management Partners, a Spanish SME specialized actually in managing complex international public-private partnerships, and I'm happy to attest to that qualification. They have a wide experience in project management and valorization since 1994 in a range of public-private institutions, especially in the biomedical sector, covering different disciplines, therapeutic areas, and the whole drug discovery and development value chain for that matter. Carlos is actually also currently the coordinator of IMI Neuronet within the IMI GU. So Carlos, over to you.
Thank you, Lennert, and thanks everyone. Thanks especially to Alzheimer Europe for the invitation and for hosting a series of Neuronet sessions again this year. So very quickly, just to complement Fatima's excellent presentation, a few words about what Neuronet has been trying to achieve over the past couple of years. Neuronet is a very modest project. Hopefully by the end of the presentation, I will have convinced you of the good investment it is. You know, relatively speaking, most projects, as you know, most research projects in the European space are probably in the range of 10 million, tens of millions sometimes So this was just a 1.2 million euro funding addressed specifically, as Lennert explained in the introduction, to try to boost synergy and collaboration across the whole range of IMI projects that were addressing neurodegenerative disorders, correspondingly a very small consortium as well. So this was a little bit the complex map that we were facing at the beginning of the project, in which you have many institutions, many different projects, and you can see on the left side the number of IMI projects and also some other related initiatives that we were tackling as a little bit our constituency back then. And we realized very soon that this was spanning probably more than 260 different organizations collaborating in these different projects over the whole of Europe, essentially 25 countries, more than 2,300 individuals working daily for these projects, so nothing significant, and a global budget for the IMI neurodegeneration portfolio closer to 400 million. So by all means, this is not something that can be disregarded as a minor initiative. It is a major initiative in neurodegenerative disorders. So the question was, of course, you know, what is the return on investment for the taxpayer? So remember, this almost 400 million euros is my money. It is your money as well. So what is the return to society? How can we gauge a little bit the impact? What can we do better to actually maximize that impact? So for that, we did a number of, we carried out a number of actions in Neuronet. And one of the first was obviously to try to understand the landscape within IMI. And for that, we developed what we call the knowledge base. And this is publicly available, so everyone can access it. And you have the link at the bottom of the slide. I invite you all to actually check the knowledge base. You will there see all of the information related to the IMI projects, all compiled into one single place. And that spans basic information about the projects, project characteristics, project deliverables, so specific results from the projects in terms of documents, some of the tools that we can actually gather from different projects, the timelines, etc. So I think that it's worth a visit. Particularly, I will focus now on 2 or 3 of the aspects that we have included in the knowledge base to try to help with impact assessment. One of those is what we call network diagrams. So we try to map what are the relationships between projects, between institutions in the global IMI landscape. So, you know, these many institutions, more than 200 institutions that are collaborating in IMI projects. Can we provide some sort of visualization about how they interact? Can we provide some sort of sense of whether projects are connected or are completely isolated? So you have 2 examples on the screen. They are available from the knowledge base, and we have added also some interactivity to try to make sense. Some of the diagrams you can see that are quite complex, actually, with many relationships based on participating, for example, in the same project, or based on having joint publications in a certain area. So we have tried to make those interactive, and hopefully this will be moving as I speak. That is not a bug, it is a feature. So you will see that you can play with a little bit with the maps. You can see here an example of the map that connects all of the pharmaceutical companies participating in European IMI projects. And you can see there the connections between each of those. It clearly gives a sense of how collaboration is improving. I remember a couple of decades ago where industry was super protective of their own results, of their own IP. They still are, but I think that they've got much more used to actually collaborate and share results and have joint ventures to actually accelerate the development of innovations. So, you know, hopefully these kind of maps will help also to have a better view on how the whole IMI initiative is helping break down silos. Another thing that we included in the knowledge base was what we call the asset map. So this was a little bit trying to extract from the projects the most important results, the most tangible outcomes that we could detect from the projects. So here you see a map in which we try to depict the different phases of drug development from the outside, which is the more preclinical side of things, towards the center, which is the more applied initiatives. And then you see a number of logos of the different projects. Each of the logos represents one specific asset. And you can click on those assets and then have more information about each of those assets, have ways of actually accessing them if they're publicly available. And if they are not publicly available, what is the means by which you can access such assets? And you can see that the different segments of the circle represent different types of assets. So one segment that is especially populated, for example, is the tools, templates, and guidelines. There's not a lot in terms of taxonomies, cohorts, etc. So you can see a number of different categories there. So essentially what we want to do is to provide summarized information and links to the respective projects and asset owners. But this also allows us to see where the gaps are, which is very important, informing perhaps the agenda for the next framework program, the new innovative health initiative, for example, where perhaps more effort should be put looking towards the future. This also enabled us to have collegiate discussion across the project leads in terms of priorities, in terms of innovations needed, and also in terms of what kind of assets could be taken or should be taken forward for the benefit of all. So just a few examples of the assets that we have in the asset map. Again, a wide range of different results. Some of the projects are admittedly very preclinical, so looking at basic understanding of disease mechanisms, for example. You can see there above, a specific asset coming from the Imprint project in terms of a data set for genetic screens for tau and alpha-synuclein aggregation. You can see the longitudinal cohort study of EPAT, much closer to application, if you like. You can see, for example, towards the bottom left, a specific tool developed by the Radar AD project that is looking at developing an app for monitoring of daily life tasks with a view on cognitive status assessment. So there's a number of assets that you can then again check in the knowledge base. One of the things that we did also in Neuronet, and it was almost natural that it happened, was to discuss on a specific assets, especially because we realized that some of these assets had huge potential, but they were suffering from the finalization of the respective projects. So obviously, a project is funded for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, in extreme cases, 6 years. But you can see yourself in a situation where the funding is over, the project period is over, and you're left with a very promising asset that could be left in a drawer. And that is not good return on investment for society. So looking at some of the assets, Neuronet has also tried to facilitate the expansion and the further development of some of the assets. And I want to focus on the one that is there on the upper right side of the screen right now, the EPAT longitudinal cohort study. This was a study that was following up patients systematically up to probably more than 1,600 participants, research participants, very deep phenotyping. So a number of assessments were done, including CSF collection, including imaging, etc. And the idea there was to build a cohort that was trial ready, that could help recruit for adaptive clinical trials. More than 30 centers were already involved in that longitudinal cohort study. So when EPAT was reaching its end, we thought, well, how can we as Neuronet help take this asset forward in the interest of participants, in the interest of centers, in the interest of the research community and society at large. And we thought, well, maybe we could transform this very rich asset and therefore very expensive asset as well, in the sense that deep assessment of participants always bears a high cost. maybe we could turn it into something that is wider and that is a little bit cheaper and therefore easier to sustain. So could we build a European parent cohort that follows up participants over time and that has, almost by definition, an indefinite nature? So we will follow people forever. And then how do we sustain that? Well, we could actually use that for a number of research projects. So projects looking at, for example, artificial intelligence, projects looking purely at new ways of measuring cognition, projects looking at the effect of exercise or diet, projects looking at relationship between other conditions and neurodegenerative conditions, sleep patterns, gait, you name it. Them all could benefit from an easier way to offer this study to participants, and therefore ease recruitment. We could accelerate the setup of such projects by having this kind of permanent parent cohort. So this was a little bit of a crazy idea coming out from our discussions in Neuronet with the project leads. And actually, we tried to carry it out as a kind of grassroots initiative. And we offered the idea to a number of clinical sites all over Europe. And perhaps not surprisingly, many people were interested from the sites. The sites are the ones that are seeing the participants, the research participants, that are seeing how people live with dementia and with other conditions. So they said, yes, I mean, we have to do this. And we said, well, no, we have no money. You have to take that into account. Neuronet is a very small project. And they said, we don't care. We want to do this. Up to 40 sites have enlisted themselves to the NEURO cohort initiative right now. We're following a systems leadership approach by which every center is at the same level. We're all a coalition of the willing because we think this has to be done. We don't want to wait for a funding priority or for a call for proposals to be opened. We think that we can actually do this, or at least start this, and then probably funding will come. So this is all to enhance visibility and participation for sites, especially those sites that are underrepresented typically in research projects because they are smaller, or perhaps because their profile is not that well positioned in the global landscape. But the objective is the same, is to enable more efficient project setup. So these 40 sites gathered together probably more than 25,000 participants that are already involved in their local studies. Of course, it is a little bit of a maze of local protocols. Every clinical site, every memory clinic out there probably has their own local studies going on. So we detected that probably that we were dealing with some 50 different research protocols that we had to harmonize, etc. And this is the list of all of the centers that have signed already a letter of interest to participate. As you can see, many countries represented, some more than others, that's natural. But we're very happy to see that this is the degree of response you get from the research community, from the healthcare community, and from the participants themselves when you're actually developing new ideas without waiting for political priorities to actually match the interests of the community. In terms of the logistics, very briefly, we try to be minimally invasive. So what we don't want is to develop something from scratch that is very complex to implement and therefore, again, very costly. So try to take advantage of what's already happening at sites. So of the type of assessments that are already being implemented on the research participants. We want to provide a framework for data collection. So we're suggesting that there's a minimal data set that we should all be collecting. And this ranges from the very basic, so demographics, to some of the more or perhaps less frequent measurements, such as, for example, healthcare resource utilization or caregiver quality of life, which we think may be a bet for the future. We think that these kind of assessments may be very important, especially now that we're seeing in the market that there's new potential interventions, pharmacological interventions that are being implemented. We think that this is something that will be of more and more interest in terms of reimbursement discussions, for example, in terms of actually gauging what is the benefit of such interventions along the disease progression path. We're using right now, and I have to thank publicly the medical informatics platform of the Human Brain Project. They offer their platform for free for this initiative. So we're trying to compile all of these data in a federated structure. So actually the data don't leave the local site. We're just able to access remotely the data that the site wants to share, essentially for the purposes of assessing feasibility. So I told you about the number of projects, different projects that we could imagine could benefit from such a parent cohort. We need a way of actually gauging how many participants are of a certain profile and they're available to participate in studies, and where are they located. So this is essentially what the platform is for. And finally, just my final slide. This was just an example of the kind of activities that we did in Neuronet. So thinking about Neuronet again, globally, what we did was list a little bit the different types of things we did over the past couple of years. And they range from providing the integrated view of the portfolio, as I showed you, in terms of the knowledge base, in terms of the asset map, the impact assessment activities, such as the ones Fatima was reporting on, acting as a kind of multiplier for communications, and trying to boost the communication efforts of the individual projects, etc. So a number of things that we did in Neuronet, and we asked the Neuronet users, Neuronet constituency, well, what did you think of those? I mean, did we do a good job, or do we have margin for improvement? Where exactly? So you see the results of the what we call the sustainability survey. And here you see everything that is on the right is a good thing for us, and everything you see on the left is not so good. So we were very happy to see that most of the respondents thought that most of the services that Neuronet was providing were either extremely or very valuable. So those are the reds and the purples there, as you can see, with a special focus on the first 5, perhaps. So perhaps looking towards the future, this is the subject of this session. Do we always need a Neuronet kind of thing when we have multiple projects, when we have a very rich and therefore complex portfolio of individual projects? Do we always need a tool like Neuronet to overcome fragmentation? So yeah, I'll leave you with that, and I'm very happy to hand over to you, Lennert, for discussion.
Okay, thanks a lot, Carlos. Really nice, presentation. I think it really highlights all the great work Neuronet did, but especially, what the individual projects did, right? So I think the richness of the portfolio, I think also the ambitious idea about the NEURO cohort, something that Neuronet takes along, is something very nice to see, I guess. Before moving into the panel discussion, and I did see a question on the Q&A linked to Carlos' presentation, so we will start with that question to open up the discussion if you like. But maybe very first, let me introduce you to the other panelists in the session that are anxiously waiting as well to participate. I will introduce you, and then please do say something or wave so the people actually on the line know who you are. I will start with Angela Bradshaw. So Dr. Angela Bradshaw is a project officer at Alzheimer Europe. She did obtain her PhD in vascular biology at the University of Cambridge in 2008. Prior to joining Alzheimer Europe in 2019. And prior to that, she worked as a lecturer as well at the University of Glasgow, leading translational research projects on vascular diseases and gene therapy. And now at Alzheimer Europe, I think most of you will know her. Ange collaborates on several EU-funded projects, including IMI Neuronet, co-authoring actually the recent AE Alzheimer Europe policy report, data sharing in dementia research, the EU landscape. With Jean-Georges, she co-moderates actually our Neuronet working group on patient privacy and ethics. So Ange, if you can just speak up.
Thanks a lot, Lennert. Very happy to be here. And I'll just say that Neuronet was my first IMI project. I'd been involved in a lot of consortium projects before, Horizon 2020, FP7, FP6, which shows my age, but Neuronet has been a fantastic introduction to the IMI portfolio. And I hope that Alzheimer Europe and everyone on this call remains a key part of similar initiatives going forwards. Very happy to be here.
Okay, thanks a lot. Moving on then to Laurent Pradier. Dr. Laurent Pradier is working at Sanofi R&D as a scientific fellow in the rare and neurological disease research therapeutic area, in charge of scientific strategy and external innovation analysis. He is a graduate of École Centrale Paris Engineering School and received a PhD from the University of California in the US. With more than 30 years of experience in neurodegenerative diseases in Sanofi, he has a very strong background, obviously, in identification and validation of therapeutic targets for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease using genomics technologies. He managed efforts to develop transgenic models for neurodegenerative diseases, led development of several drug candidates, small molecules and antibodies included. He was serving also as a Sanofi representative to the European IMI Neurodegeneration SGG, so the governance group, and is actually participating in a couple of ongoing projects, including Neuronet. So Laurent, welcome.
Good afternoon to all. I'm glad to participate and ready to see how the different IMI projects were really designed and trying to contribute as much as possible to paving the way to new treatments.
Okay, thanks a lot. And then last but not least, Martin Hofmann-Apitius. Professor Dr. Martin Hofmann-Apitius holds a PhD in molecular biology, and as well brings extensive experience in functional genomics and applied bioinformatics to the panel. He has experience in both academic and industrial research. Since 2002, he has led the Department of Bioinformatics at the Fraunhofer Institute for Algorithms and Scientific Computing, and is also professor for Applied Life Science Informatics at Bonn-Aachen International Center for Information Biotechnology. He was the academic initiator and actually the co-coordinator of Ethionomy, another IMI project aimed at generating a mechanism-based taxonomy actually for neurodegenerative diseases. He's also involved in many related IMI projects such as EPAD, Radar AD, and is a work package leader for the Virtual Brain Cloud project. So welcome, Martin, as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lennert, for the nice introduction. And I think that everything is said. I'm sometimes playing the advocatus diaboli, in particular when it deals with legal and ethical aspects and data organization stuff. But I know, of course, a lot from our previous discussions, a lot of the mindset here in this round, and therefore I'm quite optimistic that we will have a really, really good meeting. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot. Well, I would suggest let's get going. So let's start actually with the question coming from the audience, and it links to your presentation, Carlos, so maybe you can kick off with also sharing your thoughts on that. But the question from the audience, of course, linked to sustainability, it definitely, we know that is a key challenge for many of these projects. What is lacking at the moment, and what can funders or research networks actually do better?
I can give you my personal view on that. I think that sustainability is a typical concept that is easier said than done. So it's very easy to, and it has evolved along the years. I remember when it was called exploitation, and then was deemed to be politically incorrect for some reason, and then it evolved to business planning. Now we talk about sustainability as a kind of holistic thing. I think that there's sustainability has to be embedded in the project concept as well. So it's something that there's no way in which you can move from being in a project is like living in a bubble. I think, according to my experience, you live according to certain rules for a certain period of time, number of years with the same people, which is the consortium, the collaborating institutions. And then they just let you go, and it is not easy for a child that has been always in a bubble to actually go and confront real life. I think that there should be more of an overlap between real life and the project life. So both worlds don't have to be separate until the very end. They could actually be combined in certain ways. That is not always easy in terms of the legalese and in terms of the admin rules that sometimes affect the projects. But I think that we cannot any longer think about an ivory tower scheme in which people are isolated doing research, and then they come out and you expect someone to pay for the continuation of the efforts or to pay for the product. No matter how good it is, if you live during 5 years isolated from the real world. But I'm happy to hear the views of others. I'm sure Martin has an opinion on this.
Yeah.
I do have one. I was just about to mention it. We have been talking about assets that have been generated, and the Neuronet project and consortium has been great in doing a systematic approach to asset assessment and cataloging and making them actually explicit, sort of explicit. And there's also providing the right categories for them and to bring some order into assets that have been generated and valuable stuff. And one of the easiest things in the context of value being generated is actually data. Reusable data. That's straightforward. You would believe it is straightforward, but actually we see again and again that the effort to generate high quality deep phenotyping data is not valued sufficiently when it comes to the follow-up. So what Carlos was just saying, like in the real value of many studies, I just to name one at Neuronet from Simon Lovestone a long time ago. This is more than 10 years ago that they did this study, and the value actually doesn't go away. Sometimes with imaging data or so, the machinery changes and the image acquisition changes and so on. So there may be technical machinery that is where aging is not a good idea, but in general, data are actually valuable over a longer time. In particular, if you can compare them to other data sets, if you are aware of strata, existing recruitment, and so on, so biases that may be in there, and if this is all explicit. And what we are still not ready to do is to value data by budget, by means of budget. So I would rather write a grant proposal where I say I have here 150,000 euro assigned to purchasing the entire EPAT, what up and down and with all biomarkers and everything. So there's a public release set of EPAT, but there's also other valuable information that you can get. And to refund, let's say, the colleagues in Edinburgh for their effort, because they, in particular, when it comes to data that are linked to biosamples, to biomaterial samples, it's actually still effort, ongoing effort over time for the administration, for the frozen samples and the aliquots and whatsoever in the administration of that, and sending and logistics. So I think we should prepare more for what I call a data economy, or an economical model where I hopefully can be much faster, not begging for data, but just buying them, buying
But
them.
I think, and thanks for sharing your views as well, Martin and Carlos. But I mean, hearing the both of you, I mean, we know, I mean, just looking at IMI projects, they are, of course, tailored and researched towards R&D activities, right? But so hearing you, I mean, is it more a matter of finding appropriate business models or organizational model to help secure the sustainability activities or assets, if you like? Or do you think it's also a matter of, and maybe that links a little bit to the presentation of Fatima, when stakeholders indicate like maybe the awareness on and disseminating more widely or better on what has been done in the portfolio, may that generate also some more interest for potential investors, or that required change of mindset, or that model, if you like.
It could be. I think that, for example, I was thinking, what I meant was the project should be exposed to the outside world earlier. In the same way that you actually take care that your child interacts with other children and knows about life in general as they grow up, and they progressively learn. I think that projects should progressively learn about the market they're in. Who's going to pay for this? Who's interested in that? Maybe the one that is interested and will in the future be paying for the sustainability, they want a slightly different approach, and they want to incorporate some elements that will boost immensely the sustainability prospects of their project, right? If you just keep in your in your world forever, for 5 years, and then you're just guessing what may be interesting for other stakeholders. You're just guessing what is interesting or not for people out there, etc. I think that there's a lot to be said about how the projects are organized, and as you say, maybe there could be a take-up committee that is permanently watching a project. But I also think that there's a big problem in how science works. Science works by accumulation. You just accumulate evidence. Yeah. So naturally, many of the projects are just cumulative as well. They build on previous projects and they expect that there's going to be future projects that will feed from them, right? In a kind of never-ending feeding chain, if you like, which sometimes makes it difficult to actually sustain specific results in isolation. I've done this project, but this project is part of a chain, right? I don't expect it to be sustainable, perhaps, or what do we mean by sustainable? Do we mean sustainable for me? Because for me, it's great if I have a series of projects. For society, it's not that great, right? So we have to, I think that research with the pandemic and everything, I think more than perhaps, we are at the time in history where more people understand research now, many more than 2 years ago, perhaps. They're getting used to the concept of papers, and they used to get to the concept of evidence, and tooling, and they can see more the research results. So we're blurring both worlds. I think we should take advantage of that as well.
Ange?
Yeah, I think there's a few points to add to that. So on the idea of creating a data economy, and I think in theory, that's a very good idea. I would say that the word economy, we have to be a little bit careful about not equating the word economy with money necessarily, because where you think about returning fair value for data or for insights, the question of ownership crops up. And then you have to address the rather thorny issue of whether the data that is generated from a clinical research study is a property of the patient or the participant, what that contribution deserves financially, whether it deserves financial remuneration, what you add on for harmonization, management, organization, the more data management aspects. It's really quite a difficult issue, and there are some ethical questions that maybe need to be addressed as well when thinking about that concept of a data economy. And I think those questions will need to be addressed head on. I think there's a lot of people who might be tiptoeing around them a little bit because they are challenging issues to address. But I think if we have some honest conversations that involve different stakeholders, we could maybe come to some conclusions and some methods that could be used. And then my second point about how research works, coming from an academic background, it's true that you go from project to project, and the financing of academic research and academic careers in general, it is not, you know, I think if anyone looked at it from the outside, they say, well, hang on, how is this working? There doesn't seem to be any organization. So a person who is tenured will get their salary from the institution or the organization, but their survival as a tenured person will be dependent on bringing in funding from research, which will come and go from year to year. And it's not a system that's necessarily hardwired for sustainability. And business development models in universities are often looking at spin-outs, for example. So the models they're looking at are models that might not work on many different scales. So I think there's a few issues to address. Unfortunately, I have no obvious solutions, but I think talking and communicating and things like Neuronet are very useful to actually try and hone down the key points that need to be worked on.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, and thanks for sharing your views, Ange. And I think, I mean, it will definitely be ambitious to, you know, change the way, you know, the actual scientific research for that matter is going. But I think, I mean, we do have, in that sense, the mandate also from Neuronet to at least try to facilitate or change that, you know, within this IMI context and the European research, right? And I think the notion of that, you know, research quid pro quo, we discussed it on Monday as well, and an honest appraisal of is really, you know, the essence that is needed in this. Maybe switching gear a little bit, I mean, just looking at the time, I mean, and then linking also again to Fatima, her presentation, I was actually curious, it was curious to see that a couple of stakeholders actually pointed out, well, on the one hand side, and I would definitely like to hear, Laurent, your views on that as well, is like, it is at the moment the portfolio maybe a little bit too focused on AD as such. I mean, can you maybe share your insights on that, and maybe also, you know, for future work, is there anything we can do to change? I think, I mean, just looking at the portfolio already, there are already a couple of projects that work more disease agnostic, if you like. I mean, thinking about, you know, digital endpoints, for example, around sleep, or you know, activity that can serve multiple disease indications, if you like. But still, the perception is there, because this is what the stakeholders do indicate. Also, feedback from the stakeholders, we need to do more work, you know, in the disease progression, earlier diagnosis. Again, there have already been projects done in that area. So why is this still, in that sense, a bit the perception from stakeholders? Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And I don't know, Fatima, if you maybe want to share your ideas first, and then Laurent.
Yeah, so the first point you mentioned around the focus on Alzheimer's, yes, this came very strongly. And I guess the idea is, I know that there are a few agnostic projects, but then people look at disease areas. So maybe when they're looking at that list, they're focused more on what disease areas do we see. And it was just striking that, okay, there are other forms of dementia, so is it only Alzheimer's? And then from the HTA perspective, they said there's such a big range of diseases. And I guess it's a small portfolio. There are 19 projects, so there might be a case there, but it's just it just did not feel as reflective. So maybe highlighting how the less disease focused projects could benefit different disease areas, maybe that would help with the perception. And then in terms of sorry, what was the second point again?
No, I think the other bit, and yes, it was a long question. I think the other bit was more around, I mean, despite that we had a couple of projects, you know, for example, EPAD, a longitudinal cohort where we're trying to understand longitudinal disease progression a bit better. That has been completed, right? It was a 5-year project, a quite big investment actually as well. But so, in a way, so why? What is wrong there? Is it like perception or
just the dissemination and knowledge of that? Because speaking to the HTA and regulatory experts, they were saying we really need to understand what happens in the long term if someone gets this treatment compared to the other people in this population who do not have the disease. We need to be able to compare. And they did not feel that they had access to that data. So it might be just the dissemination and knowledge of that data, because it was, so we had people from across Europe. We had people from Sweden, we had people from Italy, we had people from different areas in Europe, HTA bodies, and they all agreed on that point. So I think it's just the knowledge and dissemination of that.
Okay. Laurent, maybe sharing a little bit the industry perspective as well.
It's true that, I mean, there were more projects which nominally could be linked to Alzheimer's disease. And it has to do also with the prevalence of the disease with the other dementia. What we don't maybe highlight enough is that it is when we talk about AD, often an AD project is contrasting versus the other type of dementia to make a difference. And it does contribute to the other dementia disease just because getting the clear diagnosis is really what was highlighted on Monday afternoon by the DLB patient. That's very clear. If you misdiagnose at the beginning, that's the big issue. So clearing between the different diseases is really important, and there is some emphasis in the current portfolio on AD, but we still have a long way to go. But again, often the projects can be serving different purposes, and that's the case for some of the factors like TREM2 on one of the projects. It's indeed an AD type of target, but it also related to frontotemporal dementia. But in the mind of most, it's classified as AD, when actually the project is broader than that. That's all. I mean, it's often a perception aspect, but we have really taken that into account, and there's been a growing number of projects specifically on Parkinson, including a clinical study. So that's part of really the portfolio and what we're trying to push forward. And the new projects like on the biomarkers availability, it's really across neurodegenerative disease to give us the tool for the key diagnosis. That's I think what we call on the industry part, and that's what the IMI enables, is to try to identify what are the key tools which we are all missing to be able to really progress our drugs faster in development towards the patients and the right patients. So we need to start with to have the right diagnosis, and then all the markers to facilitate the clinical development, and that across all diseases. So we need to do the work on all disease. And in terms of timelines, EPAD, if you're talking about the progression of the disease, all the neurodegenerative disease we're talking about have such a slow progression rate that in 5-year time, it's of a project, each individual patient would have progressed to some extent, but it's still a very short time window in the disease process. And we have to keep that in mind. It's one of the challenges we're facing.
Yep. No, and I think that's definitely true. I mean, Carlos, I mean, you also, I mean, worked on many of these projects, and I mean, what I hear also from the discussion is, in a way, it is indeed like disseminating research, findings, maybe also positioning a little bit better on what they can contribute to, right? Maybe that's also not happening appropriately as well. Sustainability of is also a challenge that we discussed, but Are there any elements that you think that could be done differently in these type of, I mean, especially thinking with the new IHI framework coming up?
As I said, I think if I had to summarize the problems I see, I would summarize them in two words. One word is fragmentation, and the second word is inertia. So I think a lot of the problems that we see are not because we lack expertise. There's plenty of very knowledgeable people participating in projects. It's not because of money, surprisingly for some. I think it's so that the global amount of money may be okay. And I'm sure many people will complain about this, but I'll still say it. The problem is fragmentation. You know, I mean, if you slice and dice so much to have small units that you can work with at the organizational level, then you're also hampering the potential global impact. And I mean, Laurent just mentioned, you know, I mean, most of these disorders don't evolve that much over a 5-year time span or even a 10-year time span. So perhaps we need a different approach to tackle these things. And I think inertia is also a big problem. All of the research, almost by definition, is innovative. And innovativeness comes with challenging a little bit the settled structures. Yeah. So if companies and academic institutions and funding agencies and everyone, you know, CROs, you name it, they all very easily resort to business as usual, then we have a problem. Because half of the time you spend in the project can be just fighting status quo, just convincing, twisting arms to make people understand that we need something different for this project, right? And I don't know if Martin, Laurent, and Ange will agree, but I think inertia is still very powerful. And it is creating, it's a clear shortcoming from my perspective.
Okay, thanks for sharing your insights as well. Maybe in the last 5 minutes, I think we discussed a couple of the challenges, definitely of working in IMI projects, and well, actually broader than that, I think these are challenges in the field as well. But maybe in the last 5 minutes, I would like to ask each of you. I mean, clearly, I mean, IMI, and we assessed it in Neuronet. More than a decade has of course had a big impact as well on the research community and beyond. So can you maybe for you personally indicate what you think has been the biggest impact of these great two initiatives, right? So I don't know who wants to go first. Okay, rank robin. So Chinese volunteer. Laurent, you can go first.
Okay, so my take is really the close coordination we have between the EFPIA partners. For our strange, it can sound very strange. I know Lennert, I know his colleagues at Jensen. We are facing the same problems, and we need the same enabling tools. Then it's competitive afterwards, but at least we know how to talk to each other, identify the key problems, and then talk to the academic and say, okay, here is our problem. How can we solve it together? And I mean, before the IMI, I didn't know how to do that. I was not aware of the others. That's all.
Yep. Martin?
Well, yeah. Networking was great, in particular when you got involved in many projects. We formed actually a family on the academic side, I think, in IMI. Other people call it a mafia. And one thing that I would really, also referring to the previous discussion, what I would really like to see in the future in IHI is a much better moderation of the discourse, not necessarily, you know, always collaboration or so, but just talking to each other regularly. I was always a strong proponent of the annual conference of all the EU funded, you know, JP&D coming together with IMI and so on, because we have no portfolio management at the EU level, full stop. We don't have that. And this is something for the Alzheimer Europe folks, I mean, really push for that there is more, there is something like a portfolio management with the different initiatives, because there's so much we have to exchange. There's so much we can learn from each other. Yep. Industry and academia and all the big initiatives and so on. It's way too little awareness, way too little.
Yeah, I agree. And Ange, I mean, so a to-do for you. So you can go next.
That's great. I was worried about being last. It's always hard when everyone takes all the good answers. Yeah, I think linking to what Laurent and Martin just said, what I've noticed is that EFPIA has really played an important role, and by EFPIA I mean by extension the IMI, in bringing EFPIA together with academia and other stakeholders in really raising awareness of the importance of patient involvement and public involvement in projects. It's much more of a systemic thing, I think, in industry to really consider the patient perspective, because ultimately these are consumers, these are the end users of products, and that's not something maybe that's as firmly embedded in academic research, partly for reasons of budget, but perhaps also because that type of research tends to be more on the discovery fundamental end. But I think having that close connection between EFPIA and academia means that the patient voice has space to come to the fore, and the IMI in providing access and encouraging involvement of patient organizations, patient advocates, inclusion of the patient voice in projects has really created a space for that movement to grow. We're not all the way there. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done, but I think that has been a really fantastic change that we've seen in the last decade, and I hope to see that progress even further with the IHI.
Yep, thanks a lot. Fatima, over to you. So the last minute.
Okay, I think from an HTA regulatory perspective, it's really good for us to be more proactive and to be able to interact earlier on with research and input into it, rather than being reactive. So I think that was a really great scope and impact. One of the reasons I joined NICE for this role. So yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. Carlos, concluding view.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, Lennert, I've been doing this, so managing international projects since Framework Program 3, I think. So, Ange, you were worried about your age, imagine mine. You know, ridiculously long time. I would say that IMI are by far the most advanced public-private partnerships. I would say that they have set a new standard for public-private partnerships in research, full stop. You know, I think that they are clearly they have provided a framework that has lots of potential, and it's not perfect, as we have exemplified today. So we have many things that we want to improve, but it clearly raised the bar. So let's see how we take it from here.
Okay, and with that, I want to thank all my colleague panelists for the great discussion. I hope the audience enjoyed as well. So many thanks for attending the session and enjoy the rest of the conference still. So thanks a lot.